As a child, I always had access to a shortwave radio. I used to listen to the BBC World Service about the Middle East. He also loved the music of that part of the world, and probably I was listening to the Quran being recited, but I didn't know it at that time. As I grew older, I continued to listen to the BBC World Service. At the time, they had a program called Words of Faith in which a different religious speaker spoke for 5 to 8 minutes a day. Each day of the week, representing all the major religions of the United Kingdom. Of all the speakers, Muslims were the ones I liked the most here. Every time the representative of the Muslims spoke, I wanted to know more about Islam. My impression of the religion was that the person who practices Islam is happy, not like bad people portrayed by the American media. I refused to believe that people I loved both Allah could be as portrayed by the media. As I come from a Jewish background, what united me to Islam was the belief that Allah does not have a partners. Work in the UK. An important time in my life came when I met a real Muslim, but I didn't know that yet. Worked with programming of computers in New York State when I felt a great impetus of visit the United Kingdom. I visited London and loved it. During my visit, I went to several employment agencies without having any luck. One of the agencies gave me several business magazines. When I returned to the United States, I started sending more CVs for companies and other agencies listed in the magazines. I went back to the United Kingdom because one of the companies wanted to interview me. So, I started to visit more companies and agencies until I got a position, despite being with a tourist visa. The company that hired me came in on a work visa for me, and the personnel department told me that I had to leave the country for the paperwork to be processed. Once again, I'm back to the United States. Another agency obtained a temporary work visa and gave me. He worked for a company called Logotech, which at that time was in Egham, Surrey. Meeting with a real Muslim for the first time sometime after you start while working at Logotech, I found out that my supervisor, Anis Karim, was Muslim. I asked him if he knew how I could get a copy of the Quran. To my surprise, he obtained a copy of the Quran for me within days. Also, he asked me to promise that he would take a shower before reading the Quran, and that he would never show it to him. Someone who could make blasphemous comments related to him. The next day I took my morning shower and made my breakfast. While eating breakfast, I started reading. After I found that reading was what Allah commanded the angel Gabriel to instruct our prophet to do, even though he cannot read or write. Well, words can't describe how I felt when I read only a small part of the holiest book in the world. Took only 10 pages when, at that point, I said to myself that this religion, it was for me. It was around 1990. The more I read, the more I wanted to know, and he loved what he was reading. At the time I didn't know anything about how to pray or any details of Islam. If Anis had invited me to the mosque in London, she would have gone with him. The only thing I knew about praying to Allah, it was the position of prostration. At the time, I knew that Muslims prayed several times a day, and I started doing it in the evening before going to bed and in the morning when he woke up. Back in the United States, when the work visa expired, I returned to the United States and was unemployed for several years. Visited my father in Huntsville, Alabama, and I created a database application for he. I saw that Huntsville was a cosmopolitan high-tech city and decided to give it a try, a programmer position. My father told me that if I couldn't get one job, would have to go back to my mother in New Jersey. A fortnight before returning to New Jersey, I got a job in programmer at a company in Huntsville. My first trip to a mosque. My sister and I were planning a trip to Indonesia because we had a friend we made on the internet. My sister asked me if I could help her find an Islamic jewelry to take away as a gift. At the time I had no idea that there were Muslims in Huntsville. Then Allah arranged things for me. I remembered that there was a store called Crescente Importação, Growing Import, which I thought was run by Muslims. It wasn't. It was managed by the group called Nation of Islam. Here is the strange part that only Allah could have arranged. We spoke to the store owner and told him we wanted to find an Islamic gem. He directed us to the Islamic Center of Huntsville. I thank Allah that they have me directed to the mosque. We went to the building, but there was only one car parked there. I spoke to the man in the car and he told us that we should talk to the imam about where to find the jewel. I was still afraid to enter in the building because, for me, it was a sacred place. I remembered one day when I saw a lady at work wearing a hijab. I told her about accepting Islam personally and she said, "Why don't you visit the mosque in Huntsville?" I'm finally back to the mosque after gathering enough courage to enter the place sacred. I spoke to the imam and he invited me to pray with the Muslim brothers. That was a turning point in my life. I loved it and started visiting the mosque once a week in the evening. So I began to visit her several times a week in the evening. The impetus to come more I was stronger and now I performed most of my prayers in the mosque, except for the prayers of Asr and Maghrib, when he was at work. I officially accepted Islam. In November 1996 I made it public my Shahada. Oro Zur and Asr alone or with other Muslim brothers in a small mosque at my workplace. I carry my prayer mat with pride in the halls of my work, in an attempt to make people feel more ask what it is. When they ask me, I tell them that I am a Muslim and that I use the mat to pray. My desktop, including my computer, is decorated with Islamic illustrations. My background on my computer it is usually the Kaaba or our mosque. Now that I'm a Muslim, there's no back to disbelief.